Good morning, everyone. Many of you know that David and I have been away. I've been gone almost 6 weeks, perhaps 6 weeks. I lose track. I went to India to be with Swami Kriyananda, the founder of Ananda. I was there for his birthday. Then I went with him when we flew to Italy, and David met us in Milan. And then we went to Switzerland, and then to Assisi, Italy, and then for a few days in Rome, and then here we are again. So many physical changes, and you write it back at exactly the same point, doesn't it? This is where I was standing on May 10th before I went to the airport to take the long journey, and here I stand again. Over the course of the last 20 years, a little longer than that, ever since I married David and his karma to globetrot overcame my karma to stay home, I have tootled about this planet quite a bit. For the first, for 20 years or so, every year or two, David and I would, with our friends Durga and Vidura, would lead a pilgrimage group to India. The first pilgrimage tour we led to India, there were 4 tour guides and only one of us had ever been to India before. So it was a real case of fancy footwork, where I would turn around and ask our guide what the facts of the situation were, and then with great authority would announce them to the group and hope that I wasn't terribly wrong. But over the course of a dozen or so trips, we actually got good at it. But it took us to the other side of the world. It acquired a lot of frequent flyer miles, and as a result, we've traveled quite a bit now. Every time I leave our home, whatever home it happens to be, I'm always acutely aware of the circular nature of things. And partly because I have traveled a lot, but also on the spiritual path, people say, "Oh, are you excited about going?" And I look forward to travel. I'm a person, I have enough Gemini in my horoscope that change is just a good thing, just capital G, capital T, regardless of what the change is. I just like for things to be happening, balanced by a Cancer nature, which likes to just hunker down with my own pillow and my own blanket. And David's Aries nature goes everywhere. I said the perfect thing for our marriage was when we had a motorhome for a while, because he always got to be someplace new and I always got to be home. And it was a perfect solution for both of us. Before we lived here, we traveled around and lectured West Coast, Western United States, and it was perfect because you just pull that little house up right next to the lecture hall and step out of your bedroom into the lecture hall, and by the time they'd unpack the books, I was in bed with my own pillow and my own covers up over me by the time it was done. Well, this long journey that we went on, this was quite a long one for us. And just as whenever I'm leaving home, whenever I literally go down those stairs out our back door, I always visualize myself coming in. Same as I'm hauling those suitcases out, filling them with stuff, I visualize them coming back in and being all over my bedroom and everything going back in the closet. It's not because in any way there's no joy in the adventure. As I say, I have great joy in the adventure. It's just there's always this knowingness that no matter what we're doing, everything in this world is just a coming and a going, isn't it? I mean, the ultimate coming and going is when we come in and out of these bodies. We live in them for a time. We make these deep, often extremely meaningful alliances with the personality and the form of whoever it might be, whether we give birth to that soul as our own child, are born to that soul as our parent, selected as our life partner. Just time passes, or seems to pass. The bodies seem to do all these things that they seem to do. And then the consciousness just decides, this has served me as long as it's going to serve me, and now I'm going to go off into some new reality. This whole form is made only by the consciousness that we have within it. And as soon as that consciousness is withdrawn, the form itself never had any fixed reality. It's a pattern of energy held in place by the powerful identification we have with ourself and our ongoing reality. The most amazing thing about how everything changes is how little it actually seems to change. Isn't that so? And how little actual mastery most people have. You get somebody on the scene like Jesus Christ, who particularly wanted to make the point of having mastery over this plane, and he did startling things. They filled big jars with water, and when they poured them out, they were wine. He saw dead people lying on the street, and he raised them up. and they weren't dead anymore. He saw people who were blind, and they weren't blind anymore, people who were sick. He just looked at all of these forms that we see as so immutable, and he just used his willpower and his understanding of a different reality to make them something completely different. When one of the things that happened when I was in India with Swamiji, he often has a video screen, and sometimes in the evening he invites people over and we'll watch a film of some kind or another. It's a way for him to be with people without having necessarily to always be the center of attention. People can just have satsang together. And we watched this movie, which we didn't watch it very long. It was a movie about Jesus. I won't say the name of it because I know some of you like it, so I'll just leave it at that point. He didn't last very long. Finally, he just got up and walked out. He didn't even say no. He said afterwards, he said, nobody in that movie was human. He said, did anybody ever make a joke anywhere through that movie? Everybody was so weighted down with the burden of being a companion of Jesus and being pious that they all just had to walk around, in slow motion and staring off into the distance, and then every so often sighing like this. And when it came time for Jesus to do miracles, Jesus would do miracles like somebody bench pressing their own weight. It was whoever conceived of the movie had so little actual understanding of what real spiritual power is, which is just looking at this world and seeing it for what it is and projecting your consciousness into a new reality. When Jesus would do miracles, he would furrow his brow, he would bend over slightly, he would clench his fists, he would break out in a sweat, And then he would finally, I don't know by what means, persuade that water to turn into wine. And then they would sort of have to take him off and towel him off, like someone between. It's just so far away from that effortless bliss, which is really what happens to us. I mean, that whole point of view expressed by that is really how most of us live in this world, isn't it? We sort of live in a state of friction against whatever's going on around us, whether it's the aging of the body, whether it's the loss of loved ones, whether it's changing economic circumstances, whether it's watching our darling little children grow up into less darling adults, whatever might happen. I was watching years ago a friend of mine at Ananda Village, the building which is now Hansa Temple is halfway up a hill, and when I lived there many, many years ago, Ananda Village is the first Ananda community, the founding community. We had the publications office in there, and we used to have our lunch out on the patio, and you could see all the way down some hundreds of yards to where the market area and the public area was. And I was sitting there one day, and I watched this man, and actually the little girl was my goddaughter, and her father. And they were a distance, probably at least the length of this temple, the long way, and I could see the whole scene. She was maybe 4. And she spied her daddy at that end, herself at this end, with the full, complete, uninhibited enthusiasm of a child. She screams out that wonderful word, which parents always love to hear. In this case, it was daddy. Daddy! Like this. She spreads her arms really wide, streaks across that distance, and just hurls herself into her father's arms. Absolute faith. He captures her like this. Oops. I think to myself, how could you possibly not grow dependent on that? How could you possibly not begin to equate happiness with that kind of enthusiasm, that kind of joyousness? We can talk a good line about being detached and not having expectations, but this world is designed not to leave us indifferent, but to make us wholly engaged one way or another. Isn't that so? And when you see people who are in the name of being detached and being spiritual or always holding themselves aloof, the result of that consciousness is not magnetic, is it? I was another father-daughter moment, not quite on point, but too charming to miss. A friend of mine, actually little Rachel Brink, she was about 6 at that time, for those of you who know, and her father's Lucian. And little Rachel, he has 2 daughters, and they both have their father just wrapped around their finger, And they should. He's a fine father, and they're darling little girls. And I was in a car trip with Rachel and Lucian and a couple of other, well, actually, Rachel was the only child. We were on an outing with a whole bunch of kids, and we were driving up to a lake, and it was like an hour-and-a-half ride, which is a fairly long ride for like a 6-year-old child. And he's, always fussing around in a very sweet way, just making sure she's fine in her little car seat in the back. And we were out about 45 minutes, and he finally turned to her and he said, he calls her Angel. Angel, it's about 45 minutes more. Are you going to be okay? It's a long ride. Are you okay back there? Rachel looks at him just like this for a moment, then stares off into the distance and said, "Candy would help." I've tried that line and other times. It doesn't really get you very far, but we turned the car upside down until we found candy for little Rachel, I'll tell you. But you see, life is designed to capture us, isn't it? It gives us people to love. It gives us wonderful memories. It gives us terrifying experiences. It gives us things that we don't want to happen at all, and they do happen to us. It gives us tragedies. It gives us incredible successes. And all of it is designed to pull our feelings out of us. I was just looking at this beautiful altar. I came in on Friday, and Ken was making it, and just such simple elegance. And doesn't it just immediately, it just pulls all this feeling out of your heart, isn't it? You just stare at the bright pink flowers or the deep burgundy flowers, and it just pulls all this feeling out of your heart. I was in Assisi where the hills are so beautiful, and one evening the sun broke through the clouds, and it was just rays of light, across the whole horizon, across these soft hills that were sort of this soft gray-green in the twilight. And one could not conceive of something more beautiful. And immediately all this feeling is drawn from the heart. This is the world that we live in. I was watching this little video that Dambara sent us of a little boy who had reincarnation memories. 7-year-old boy, you've probably all seen these things go around. I'm sure you all get the same emails I do. Just born into a perfectly ordinary family. He was a young American pilot shot down in World War II. He starts having these memories of the poor man trapped in his airplane who couldn't get out. Eventually, they take him through this whole cycle. By now he's 10 or 11. He goes to the reunion of his squadron, right? And he sees these men he's never seen before, and he knows exactly who they are. He calls them by name. They take him to the place where his plane was shot down. He completely falls apart emotionally. He's 11 years old. But the experience was there as if it were happening in the present moment. Because once these impressions are made on our consciousness, they become the fabric and the form of our consciousness. And all we're ever living in at any moment is our own consciousness. That when that realization came to me, I was 18 years old. And I have to admit, it came because I changed my consciousness by means other than meditation, and we'll just leave it there, But I had the opportunity to find out that you can shift your consciousness. And it was sort of like the conundrum of my whole existence, which I had just been pounding on with my intellect ever since I was old enough to have one, which in my case was pretty young. I'd just been pounding on that question. The question basically was, what is going on here? Everybody's just going along, and they're telling me to do this, and they're telling me to do that, and they're mowing their little lawns, and they're having their, little beers in the evening, and they're driving their cars, and all the kids are running around. And there was this underlying question, what is going on here? And I honestly used to think that when I got a little older, people would tell me that it was sort of like everybody around me really knew a much more serious answer, but they were just waiting till I got a little older, and then they would tell me. And it was a really startling thing to realize that they didn't know. That was really freaky. When my high school history teacher told me as a girl that I better be careful not to be too smart or it would scare the men away, I thought, how have I ended up here? What planet is this? You could do that when 61 or 62. When I asked my 5th grade science teacher, poor Mrs., her name, can you believe this? Her name was Pew. Can you imagine the courage of somebody teaching elementary school with a name like Pew? Maybe that's why she was a little brittle. But she was teaching me science in the 5th grade. And I recall she wrote up on the board that these were the conditions necessary to support life as we know it. Because these conditions existed on no other planet but Earth, therefore there was no life on any other planet. I was 9, 10, however old you are at that point. I said, Mrs. Pugh, couldn't there be life that was sustained by some other criteria? Maybe I didn't have that vocabulary, but I probably did. She said, no. I thought, where do these people come from and where are they going? And am I trapped here? One of my friends, her son wrote, when he was about 4, he wrote a letter to God. And, he sealed it. And then he gave it to her to mail. This was a conundrum for the mother. Do I open this? Do I not open this? Finally decided to open it. It said, get me out of here. Get me out of here, it said. Imagine that. But don't we feel like that? But I always felt like that. I just, get me out of here. I wasn't even unhappy. It just was like, something's going to happen. Something's going to happen that's going to make this whole thing different. And then it actually did. I shifted my consciousness. I didn't shift my consciousness to any place I particularly wanted to go, I have to admit, but it just changed. And when my consciousness changed, I suddenly realized that's all that's happening here. It's entirely and only how we see it. And what we're experiencing at all times is simply the sum total of the perceptions that we have developed with that we have developed the ability to perceive. Swamiji often jokes, if you put a turtle in front of a great painting, it does not have the capacity to perceive the greatness of that painting. It doesn't have the heart quality to have that quality drawn out of it. It'll just wonder if it's edible, if it wonders at all, Even many animals, I'm talking about, the bond between parents and their children. Many animals don't particularly have that bond. They lay their eggs and they leave them. The cuckoo, what does it? Drop its egg in somebody else's nest and let somebody else raise them? Even that bond is not there. You have to have a certain refinement of consciousness before you perceive these things. Now, we live in this world among average people. This is an average planet. There are demons on this planet with us. It's kind of a mixed bag right now. There are planets in which where the bottom of the barrel is not as deep and dark as the bottom of the barrel on this planet is. It's a place where many different kinds of people are coming to learn. A planet is just a school. It's just a university, which has a very broad application process, and a very poor scholarship program. And, we're just here, but it's a temporary resting place where we come to expand our consciousness, and we get slotted into it by this enormous metaphysical math problem, which is going on all the time, where the vibrations of our consciousness draw us exactly to the spot where we're supposed to be, and we stay there as long as we're supposed to stay there, and then the mathematics of our karma draw us off to another place. It's oddly personal and impersonal at the same time. Impersonal in the sense that there's nobody doing anything to anybody. It's just these forces playing themselves out, and we are the result of our own destiny, of our own repeated actions. It's a really gruesome prospect to think about sometimes, I got myself into this. I really did. I remember once I was in such a mess, I don't tend to make big messes that show, but I make big internal messes. And I'd just gotten myself into a really bad place inside. And I was falling into what I was inclined to fall into at that time, which was, it was much easier to feel guilty than it was actually to change. And it was much easier to be sad than it was to actually put out the self-discipline to redirect my energy. So I was doing that. I was just thinking that if I felt enough despair, then maybe somebody would do something for me. They weren't. So I was just having to deal with that. And then it just occurred to me, the simplest idea. You got yourself into this, you can get yourself out of it. This was a series of bad choices. And now I'm reaping the karma of my bad choices, and they are that I feel, in this case, alienated from people, embarrassed about my bad actions, a few things like that. I said, you got yourself into it, just turn around. What a novel concept, just turn around. Once I was in despair about something, I used to get much more upset than I do now, and I was lying on my back. There's a country music song called, lying on my back, tears in my ears from crying my eyes out over you. That's right. So I had tears in my ears, And then I thought, honey, talking to myself, you're just going to, after a while, you're just going to get tired of lying here. You're just going to stop crying and get up and go on with your life. And I just Is that the song? I didn't know that I was supposed to start it. Thank you very much, Mr. Todd. Well, we're all in the same mood this morning. I can see that, and I'm very glad of it. After spending all that time with Swamiji, even his health wasn't that well, and we traveled, and a lot of it was a strain. But where I'm trying to go with all of this, which is self-evident, it's all just about your consciousness. Folks, we're born, we die, we get old, we're sick, we're well, we get shot down in airplanes, we're born again as little children, and there's only one reality, one constant, and that constant is we're always there. We're always conscious. If it's happening, it's happening to you, or what I should say is aware of it's happening. And so what level we tune into it, whether we tune into it from the point of view of eternity, where it's like, been here, done this, how many times? Every time I say, oh, look, my hair's getting gray, my eyes are getting a little wrinkled, the whole youthful thing is like over. And I think to myself, why do I even notice? Why would there even be the slightest part of me that even registers it as a fact other than just the fact that the sun rose again this morning? How many times have we done this? And when are we just going to lock our attention on the eternal reality behind it all? This is what I was saying somewhere along in that story. We just live in this planet, and most of us are just the same kind of folk. Some are better than other folk, and that was where I started on the demons. I remember how I got so distracted. But then every so often, one of these other beings inhabits this planet with us. Somebody like Swami Kriyananda, somebody like Paramhansa Yogananda, somebody like Christ or Buddha or Krishna. There's a number of great souls who inhabit the planet for a while and whose vibrations permeate, like Christ, like Yogananda, like Krishna, whose lives, even though their physical bodies are long gone, the legacy of their presence, be it the Bhagavad Gita or the Christian Bible or the great disciples of Jesus who wrote those Gospels, St. John and those who followed. I was in Assisi, St. Francis of Assisi, St. Clare. These souls who lived a normal human span, sometimes like Babaji, they live much longer, but they plant on this physical earth this pulsing vibration. Well, basically it says, wake up, wake up. There's something entirely different going on here. And they leave these clues and these spirit-permeated scriptures. And they inspire disciples over and over again, like Yogananda inspired Swami Kriyananda. And they live on this planet, and they walk, and they breathe, and they go out to dinner, and they catch colds, and they go shopping, and Jesus walked on the earth. in his sandals, and he made jokes despite that horrible movie. He just moves through this world. Yogananda was here. We have film. We have the sound of his voice. But their consciousness is of something completely different. And what they say to us again and again is, that is the answer. Yogananda made it more explicit than Jesus was able to. Jesus' time and place, even as it was, as much as he said, resulted in his early demise, as you recall, in rather dramatic circumstances. I mean, people turned against him and just took him off the planet when he was only 33 years old, and he barely hinted at anything. It was not a popular time to buck the status quo. In the time of Jesus, there was an established priesthood, and that priesthood had its rules, and those rules were very profitable for that priesthood, and they gave that priesthood a certain power, and people obeyed them, and then there was the threat of this, and then Jesus sails into the middle of it and just tries to dismantle the whole thing. God is our Father. He loves us. Don't think about money or possessions. Don't worry about where you live. Look at the lilies of the field. Look how beautifully they're clothed. Do you think your Father loves you less than that? And then Jesus turned to those who were abusing the divine teachings, and he threatened them. He drove the money changers out of the temple, and as a result, they killed him. I mean, they were not stupid. They saw that he was threatening to dismantle everything. Now, times are more harmonious, slightly, and we have a soul like Yogananda coming, and a disciple like Swami Kriyananda, who tells us self-realization, Kriya Yoga meditation, live in that inner reality. There's really no other answer. I've from time to time had the opportunity, to hear other church services or religiously inspired things. Sometimes I watch something on television, like when the president was being inaugurated, and I watched the National Cathedral service was, the president's first church service, and they had a woman preacher. I don't know what her name was, and I don't mean to be rude, but she was awful. She was just really awful. In the first part, well, I guess I'm just being really unkind. I might as well finish. You could not feel in her that she had anything other than an absolutely ordinary consciousness. She could have been doing anything. When a person gets up and speaks like that, they have a responsibility. And then what she said was so, hopeless is the only word I can think of. Here she's preaching to the new President Obama and his family, and God knows the poor man was handed a pretty tough load, I mean, things were bad enough, but just before the election, of course, the whole country started disintegrating economically. So the poor guy is sitting here, he's got everybody in the whole world expects him to do miracles, and all she sort of has to say is, gee, golly, wow, here we are, and here we all are, aren't we? So let's all just hold hands or something. It's just not going to take us anywhere, friends. It's about consciousness, and there's one last point before I give up, because this is the point. Consciousness is about self-discipline. Consciousness is about resisting that shortcut, resisting that thing that you think is going to make you happy, resisting this sort of momentary, desperate, reincarnationally repeated over and over hope that if I do the same thing again, it'll come out differently. If I cling to that which is going to pass, then it will make me happy forever this time. Of course it won't. It's not the answer that we shut ourselves down. That doesn't work either. But what we have to be aware of is what's really happening behind this world. There is this one reality. There is this is what draws the feeling out of us again and again. Swami Kriyananda was so moving so many times during these last weeks. He was, as I said, he was very unwell for several weeks, and then he got better. And at one point he said, so many people become bitter about life. He said, how can they become bitter, he said, when life itself is nothing but bliss? Isn't that an interesting way to put it? When everything is made of bliss. Now, it's not just a statement that like everything is made of bliss and you better believe it. That's the fruit of always asking yourself, behind every experience, what am I really experiencing? In every reality, what is the underlying truth of it? These are just theories. These are just words. These are just somebody else's promises, until we ourselves discipline the wild monkey mind enough to ask the question, is joy possible? And if so, where does it come from? All of that long list of spiritual do's and don'ts, whether you call it the 10 Commandments, the yamas and the niyamas, whatever you want to call it, it's all a list of breaking out of this little identification with this little egoic, body-defined self, thinking that our happiness comes from holding on to that which is going to slip through our fingers like water, or whether our happiness comes from just opening ourselves wide and seeing whatever flows, whatever wind or water or life in any form flows through, behind it is the hand of God. At a very early point in my spiritual life, I had a sort of crisis of essentially how open-hearted to be, because people are not always trustworthy, and few people had done things that were very painful to me. But I thought to myself, if I close off, where will that take me? And I made the decision that I'd always heard Swami say, and it's not that I've succeeded always, but I know where I'm going. He said, Swami talked about it this way. He said this man gave him a really hard luck story once, and Swamiji, he needed money. Swami thought to himself, it's probably just a story. But the man obviously needs money or he wouldn't be working this hard to get it. He said, so I'll just give him the money he's asking for. And the man said, well, thanks so much. I'm going to pay you back. I wouldn't want you to lose your faith in human nature. Swami smiled and he said, I lost my faith in human nature a long time ago. He said, it's not you I'm trusting. And because the man proved untrustworthy, he said, it's God I'm trusting. If I keep my heart open and give as much as I can give from my inner self to the inner reality I see around me, he said, that will always bless me. It isn't one another that we trust. We can't make that little girl promise never to grow up. We can't make her promise to love us as much when she actually gets to know us as she does before she does. Sometimes your children are your friends also. Sometimes they're just your children. And when they get old enough to choose, they don't choose you because you're not really friends. You were just parents. Sometimes our spouses, when they get to know us, have a different attitude than they did before. People die. What are we trusting? If we have to trust that eternal consciousness on the poem Samadhi, which we have on the wall, from joy I came, for joy I live, in sacred joy I melt. Those are just words until we change our consciousness by the constant effort to lift our minds above the obvious, feel the divine behind, and always live in that reality.